Last week we talked about how most of the religions in the world spend their time reaching up and trying to find God. And yet Christianity is a religion where God actually reached down to us. You remember that? That He reached down and He spoke to us. He chose, He didn't have to, but He chose to reveal Himself to us. And I think that's awesome. It's because He wanted us with Him. And in Psalm 19 that we talked about last week, the psalmist talked about two ways that God chose to reveal Himself to us. And I'm going to test you and see if you were paying attention and how good your memory is. What are those two ways? Through the heavens and His creation. What was the second one? His Word. Okay. The psalmist said, that the heavens declare the glory of God. And then it talked about the Word and the preciousness of the Word, greater than gold, and all these things that he talked about. Today we're going to talk about kind of a follow-up to that, but we're going to talk about a third way that God revealed Himself to us. Okay? And that's what we're going to discuss for a few minutes this morning. And really the Hebrew writer explains this to us. Let me turn this on. That'll work better probably. The Hebrew writer explains it this way. Listen to this. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. Now, just to pause here, that's God speaking to us and revealing Himself through His Word, right? The prophet's given us His Word. He goes on, but in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed the heir of all things, through whom also He created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of His nature. And He upholds the universe by the word of His power. And it's such a powerful and beautiful passage. And I think this is the best way of all the ways, even better than the creation in the heavens, and even better than His Word, is Jesus coming to this earth. Isn't that amazing? I mean, just think about it. All history led to the incarnation of Jesus Christ. From the very beginning. I mean, and the funny thing is, not really funny, I've heard preachers actually proclaim that the birth of Jesus is not really important. It's the cross that's important. Well, I totally agree that the cross is very important. But I disagree that the birth of Jesus is not important. The birth of Jesus put God on earth with His creation. Now, I want you to just let that sink in for just a minute and think about that. We know Jesus came and all that stuff, but really think about what that means. It put God on earth with His creation. That is awesome. I mean, that's amazing. For over 30 years, God the Son was on earth and walked around with His creation, on His creation and with His creation, the people that He created. And yet, when you read the Old Testament, and you go back and you read all the passages about God and the different things in the Old Testament, it guides you. It's kind of a lamp to our feet. But God can still, in the Old Testament, God can still seem a little bit vague, a little distant. There's this concept of God in heaven and these people on earth. And it's like this concept of God just seems a little bit distant. Timothy said it well. He put it this way in 1 Timothy chapter 6. He said, God, the blessed and only ruler, the King of kings and Lord of lords, who alone is immortal and who lives in unapproachable light, who no one has seen or can see. To him be honor and might forever. Amen. Now I want you to look at the passage on the board and help me out. Okay? How is God described in this passage? What do you see? He's a ruler. What else? The only ruler. Good. What else stands out? King of Kings. I mean, basically you just have to read it, right? He is what? He alone is immortal. You know? He lives in unapproachable light. No one's seen him. No one can see him. It gives us that idea that I was talking about a minute ago, that God seems to be kind of vague and distant. We can't see him. We can't approach him. The thing that stands out to me is that he lives in unapproachable light. It's like God is this being so far off, and we can't see him. We've never seen him. We cannot see him, and he's unapproachable. So just stay away. You know, that's kind of this idea that we get. But he's so righteous and holy that these physical bodies cannot withstand his holiness. Can't look at him or we will die, is the idea. In fact, that's what we're told. I mean, think about how unbelievable that is and how we see this picture of God on his throne with the lightnings and the light shining from him, light coming from him, and how majestic God seems. And yet, through Christ, we can actually see God for who he really is. Isn't that amazing? I mean, I really want you to think through this. Through Christ, God reveals himself in a way that we can actually understand. You know, it's not this vague, distant concept of this Holy One that we should worship, yet we don't know much about. Jesus reveals him in a way that we can actually relate, that we can understand. And Jesus is a part of this God that exists in unapproachable light, yet he came down to this earth and made it so that we can approach him. That's God revealing himself to us in the most beautiful way. You know, when you think about the birth of Jesus, when you think about the birth of Jesus, I want you to think about God in heaven, who is so far beyond us, greater than anything that you could even imagine, but he came down and became human form so that we can approach him, so that we can understand him, so that we can live like him. We couldn't do that with the concept of God in the Old Testament, could we? We can't live like that, but we can live like Jesus. What amazing revelation to us. You know, a lot of times when we think about the image and the story that we read, and we think about the birth of Jesus, and we think about him, the baby lying we think of this baby lying in a manger, and because there was no room at the hotel around there, the inn, you know, and so we hear the story and we read the story about him lying in a manger. And sometimes we can just kind of think, ugh. I mean, what kind of a birth is that? I mean, you know, we want things that are sterile, and we want comfort and blankets. And Jesus was born and put in this feed trough. That's what a manger is. It's just a feed trough. On some old sticky hay. I don't know if you've ever sat on hay, but it's kind of sticky and itchy and all that kind of. That's what he had. And we look at that and we think he's born in this old stinky old stable. But instead of thinking of Jesus and the circumstances of his birth, I would like for us for a minute to imagine and think about our reaction if we had been there. I mean, I think it's easy for us to read about Jesus, and we'll sing songs about Jesus, and think about the little baby in the manger, and it's such a pretty scene, and you have the little sheep around, and you know what I'm saying. It's this mental picture that we have. But if I were in Bethlehem and God was born into a human, how would I react? How would you react? I mean, think about that. What would I have done? This God who dwells in unapproachable light is actually here on earth. This God that everyone said in the Bible and says in the prophets and everybody, you cannot see God or you'll die. And yet, this God becomes a little infant, and he's in my town of Bethlehem, and I find out about it. What would I do? Let me ask, what would you do? What would you do if you were in Bethlehem and you heard that God was a baby in your town over in a barn somewhere? What would you do? You wouldn't believe it? It would be hard to believe. It's so unimaginable. What would you do, Wade? You'd play with the baby? Awesome. That would be cool. I'd want to go see him. What the shepherds want to do? They came and worshiped, you know? They wanted to see this thing, this one, this God on earth. I mean, think about it. This God that people have read about for thousands of years that is so unapproachable is a little baby. Are you kidding me? I mean, how amazing is that? You know? I would want to see this infant. I want to see an infant that was conceived not by man but by the Holy Spirit. I want to see an infant whose father is that unapproachable image that we think about with the light and the lightnings and the power and the majesty. That is the Father, you know? I don't want to belittle this, and I wasn't planning on saying this, but it just popped in my mind. The Lion King, you know how Mufasa is kind of majestic looking dad, you know? It's like, here's dad. Oh, you know what I'm saying? Please don't put Jesus on that level, but I'm just saying, it's kind of the picture. Imagine if God on his throne is the dad. Think of the power. Totally amazing. The revealed words have now taken on human form. It's the greatest revelation of all. That's why Jesus writes this, or John writes in his letter in John chapter 1 so beautifully. Listen to this. In the beginning was the Word. Notice the word word here is a capitalized word. It's like a name. It's not a word like that's just made with ABCs, right? Listen. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Verse 14 says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, do me a favor. I want to get some response. Look at the passage. Okay? You've heard this probably 100 times. But listen to it in your mind. What does this passage say about the Word? What does it say? What are some things it says about the Word? Just throw some out. It's always been there. It's what? With God, did I hear? Was with God. Was God. What else? The Word is a He. Okay? Excellent. Okay? What else? All things were made through Him. And without Him, nothing was made, which means He was involved in the creation. What else? The Word, He, became flesh. Who is this Word? Christ. If we reread this, listen to it. In the beginning was Jesus. In the beginning was the Christ. And the Christ was with God. And the Christ was God. You know, sometimes we think of, well, there's God, but then there's Jesus and He's kind of lower. You ever kind of think that? He is God. He's the same. What an amazing passage. And it says that look at it. The light shines. He was the light. Jesus was the light. And the light shines in the darkness. What does darkness represent? Evil. And yet it says the evil couldn't overcome it. The evil, the darkness could not overcome Jesus. The Word became flesh. Jesus, God dwelt among us. I know intellectually we all know that. But in our heart, I want us to understand what that means. This is not an intellectual statement. This is a powerful statement of love, the love of God, that says, I want to reveal myself to these people. I want them to understand me. I want them to know me. I started to say, what other kind of a God would do that? And yet there's only one God. And that one God did do that. One day in a stable in Bethlehem, heaven and earth came together. It's not just us down here and then there's God way up in heaven and it's unapproachable and just kind of a concept that we can't get. In this stable, heaven and earth came together. You know, God came to earth and became human for you and for me. I mean, it's amazing. People on earth got to encounter God in a special way, in a real way. As I said a minute ago, in the Old Testament, there's this vagueness about God, a realness, but a vagueness about God in a way. And in the Old Testament, we see there were faithful people in the Old Testament, right? But you know how rare it is to find someone in the Old Testament that was faithful for their entire life? I mean, think about it. Very, very few. Very few. The majority of the people would not stay faithful to God their entire life. But you think about the difference. The Old Testament focused on commandments that would change us. It changed us from the outside. When we keep the commandments, what do people see? They see someone who looks like they're godly because they're keeping commandments. What we needed was a living example to follow and imitate so that we could be changed from the inside. That's what God did for us. That's what Jesus is to us. To really, He knew that to really be close to Him, for us to really be close to God, we needed to see Him in an understandable way. In a way that we could relate. In a way that we could follow. When we read about the majesty of God on high, and we read in Revelation about the throne scene and the emerald rainbow and the sea of glass and the 24 elders and all the things that we see in the light coming from it, it's like, I can't relate to that. But this little baby that grew up, I can relate to that, can't you? Because we all did that. But this one was different. This was that unapproachable God becoming approachable. That little baby was part of the plan from the beginning. You know? The events, or that event was talked about for thousands of years before it ever happened. I mean, it was first mentioned back in Genesis, in the Garden of Eden, that there was going to be this one that would come. And for the rest of history, people are waiting for it. And the things are set up, and the family line is set up, and all the things laid in place. That's the Old Testament. Until this baby came. So how is this son described? Let me share. We're going to go back to Hebrews that we looked at a minute ago. But watch this very carefully. In Hebrews 1 verse 3, look at it. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint. Don't miss that. He's the exact imprint of His nature. He upholds the universe by the word of His power. Now, how does this passage describe Jesus? He's what? The radiance of the glory of God. Remember, He is God on earth. And what does it say about Him? He's an exact representation of God. You want to understand God? You want to know God? Learn who Jesus is. Because that's who God is. He's not a fake copy. He's an exact imprint, an exact replica. You want to know about the nature of God? You want to know how God would react in certain situations? Learn to know Jesus. Because that's what He is. Because if we know Jesus, we know God. And we understand God. He's the exact imprint of His nature. One of the things we're doing that y'all are aware of, and this is not a commercial for this, but I want us to understand that the online Bible study that we've been having, where we're looking at some videos and things, but the only words that are coming out of that is the words straight from the Bible, where we're studying Jesus. And I don't know about you, but that's been good for me. Because we're not just reading through it and saying, okay, we got that one, let's go to the next one. You know, the next chapter, the next chapter, the next chapter. We're slowing down. We're learning Jesus, you know? It's so good to me because, you know, since we started the study, we've learned a lot about not just Jesus, but the nature of God because we learned Jesus, you know? We know from the story, for example, of the Samaritan woman, that Jesus cared more about teaching and changing us than He cared about having food and water. That was more important. We know from John 3 that God doesn't care where we worship. He cares that we worship Him in spirit and in truth. We know that the Lord is angry when we treat the things that are sacred as just common. Like when Jesus came into the temple and they were desecrating the temple with their tables of money changers and things, and he turned them over. He was angry because they were making that which was sacred and holy just a common thing. And he was angry about that. And as we go through our study, we're going to learn some other things about Jesus. We're going to learn how he lives his life, how he talks to people during the page in the pages of the gospel. During the Sermon on the Mount, when we get to that, we're going to learn that Jesus cares what's in our hearts. Not just what we do, he cares what's in our hearts. So that lust is the same thing as adultery. So that hatred is the same thing as murder. Jesus, through his parables, his prayer, his life, when we study that and we slow down and we really soak it in, we'll learn how to forgive. That's something we all need to learn. We'll learn how to forgive. We'll learn how to guide. You watch Jesus and learn Jesus, you will learn how to love. Not the kind of love you see on TV. Jesus is love. He is the embodiment of love. And very few people understand that type of love. Jesus is the ultimate revelation. Now, I'm going to take a break for just a minute. I want to try something. I don't know if this is going to work or not, but we're going to try it. All right, bear with me just a minute. I've got something fun we're going to try. I'm going to need a volunteer, by the way. So be thinking about someone that will come up here and volunteer. You know, maybe like Allie or whoever. Okay. Wes, you want to do it? Come on. Okay. Here's what we got. Can y'all see this? In just a minute, hopefully you'll see it up on the board. All right, Wes, come here. Is that too high or you want me to turn it over? You got it? Because you're going to draw on it. Okay. All right, you take that. And here's what I'm going to want you to do. I'm going to get her to set a timer for 30 seconds. And what I want you to do is I want you to take your marker and I want you to draw and stay in the lines. Draw between the lines, that star. And I want you to draw in that, and you've got 30 seconds to do it. You think you can do that? It's pretty simple. All right, you ready? All right, ready? No, wait a minute. Okay. But you have to do it. All right, stand over here. Stand right here. All right, can you reach the star? All right, you can't look at that star. You have to look at this one. You have to look in the mirror. All right, can you see the star in the mirror? Can you see it clearly? Okay, don't look up there. Only look at the star. You've got 30 seconds to draw it in without going out of the lines. Ready? Go.
I don't know where I'm going. 20. I tried it. Good. I did. 10, 9, 8, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, stop. Okay. I don't know what happened. Okay. No, keep your marker. I'm going to give you a chance to redeem yourself. I'm going to give you 30 more seconds. This time, I want you to look directly at the star. Do y'all think he can do that?
Yeah.
Look directly at the star and fill it in. You don't have just draw a line and try to stay in the lines. You got 30 seconds. Okay? No mirrors involved. You just look at it and draw it. Ready? Go. Perfect.
Yeah.
You even beat the time. Thank you. Awesome job. Awesome job. Why is one different from the other? Because the mirror showed the same thing, didn't it? It showed the same thing. Why was one of them so beautiful and perfect, and the other one had a few mistakes? That's right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. They're missing it. They're missing it. They're missing the mark. Wes did a great job when he could look directly at it. But when he was just kind of looking at a reflection, a vague picture, it kind of got fuzzy, didn't it? I want you to think about that in relationship to what we were talking about. Before Jesus came, God was like following a pattern in a mirror. It was difficult. It was abstract almost. It was difficult for the Jews. You know? It's like following him in a mirror. I mean, God spoke a couple of times. You know, he spoke during the creation. He said, you know, he spoke the world into creation or into existence. He spoke to the people at Mount Sinai. But you never actually could see God directly, could you? You could never see God walking with man. Oh, you saw him through the commandments or through history or through the prophets, but it's kind of like seeing God through a mirror, just a reflection of God. There was no perfect example of godliness on earth for us to understand. It was hard for people to see which way to go. It was like looking at God through a mirror, looking at a reflection of God. But when Jesus came and lived on the earth and walked among man, the pattern was no longer a mirror image of God. It was no longer a reflection of God. People could plainly see which way to go. And that life looked that life looks a little better than that one, doesn't it? People could plainly see which way to go. The image of God, it was no longer just an image, it was cleared up. We can look at the life of Christ and we can actually follow the pattern without having to guess, without having to think too hard, without straying outside the lines, because he gave us a perfect example. Remember, according to Hebrews, Jesus is the radiant glory, the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature. Not a reflection of it, not a vague idea, but the exact image of his nature. I love the way John puts this. Listen, in John chapter 1, beginning in verse 17. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. That is powerful. The law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who himself God, who himself is himself God. Let me read that again. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is the closest relationship with the Father, has made him known to us. I added the to us. Has made him known. According to this passage, who made God known to us, really? The Son, Jesus. That's why this revelation is so important. We had His revealed will. We had His creation. We could see the evidence of God. We could see the commandments and some of the words from God. But until Jesus came, we couldn't relate. But Jesus Himself is God. And He showed Himself to us. For this revelation from God to be effective in our lives, though, we have to get to know Jesus. Would you agree with that? So I don't know about you, but I'm going to work even harder to get to know Jesus. Sometimes I just take the words in the Bible for granted and I don't really dig into them and listen to them. I might be trying to read one of the Gospels, and when I finish this chapter, I'll jump to the next one. And I don't really think about learning and getting to know Jesus. But when I know Jesus, I know God. And that's what our daily online reading is about, or you can do it whatever way you want to, but that's just kind of what's working for me. You can learn about Him through the Gospels. You can learn about Him through us talking about it and some of the questions the thought questions that we just something to make us think. I want to encourage everyone to really get to know Jesus. Last week, my encouragement was to get to know God. That's hard to do without Jesus. So my encouragement is to get to know Jesus. And once you know Him, once you just intimately really know Him, then it's going to be hard not to want to be like Him. It's going to be hard not to want to tell others about Him and draw others close to Him. This revelation of God is the most important of all the revelations. It's the most important thing in our lives. We get to know Jesus, we will know what true forgiveness is. We'll get to know what true love is. And praise God the Father for sending His Son. An exact image for us. An example that we can learn how to obtain righteousness. If you've never given Jesus your life belongs to Him anyway. Surrender it to Him. If you need to come to the Lord in any way to make your life right with God on earth, the God in heaven, now's the time while we stand and sing.